because then we can make sure if someone doesn't want to share it, that it's properly deleted, there's no copy anywhere, etc.
Okay.
So if you could go to your computer, and then we get in contact with you to grab it, and once we have figured out how we will share all the videos.
No problem. Happy to do that.
Yeah.
All right. So welcome. Hi, Sandra. Hi, Amelia. Hi, Murray. Hi, Jamie. I haven't seen Jamie for a long time. Hi, Ginger. I think you just heard Christina say that you realised how little knowledge I have about what I agreed to do by signing up to the Symposium of the Sun. There's just no name there. And I was asked specifically, I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it, thinking I'd get some instructions, but no instructions. So let's, if everyone is absolutely happy to do a 3-minute, like just whatever, if it's formal, great, but otherwise just whatever you want to say. If you're happy for me to time you, if it's really interesting, do I have to interrupt you? But let's just go. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you plus me plus Christina if she'd like to participate. 6 people over an hour. You get 5 to 10 minutes each if you really want it. But maybe we try and keep it to 5 minutes because some other people might come on while we're talking. Does that seem reasonable? Yeah. Who wants to go first?
Murray.
Yeah.
Okay, I can go first. That's fine. Okay, so I didn't prepare any slides or anything like all of you. I've been overwhelmed with the Trump thing and preparing for my other sessions and just trying to survive. Got 3 hours of sleep last night. So I am a research scientist with the Australian Institute of Marine Science, and our role is to understand and support the sustainable use of Australia's tropical marine areas, so Northern Australia. So originally the Great Barrier Reef, but also the Gulf of Carpentaria, that bit at the top, if you're familiar with Australia's map, and then where I live in Perth, Western Australia. So as part of that role, I do survey design so that when we go out to map the benthic communities, the habitats on the seafloor, which in Australia, there's huge areas that are completely unknown. I plan out where we go so we get maximum data for the time, because every time you go out on the ship, it's expensive and it has a carbon footprint. And then back in the lab, I use statistical modeling to create predictive maps of where we find things like sponges and hard corals and soft corals. But what I really like to work on are disturbances or phenomenon that can harm coral reefs. My PhD looked at tropical cyclone wave impacts on the Great Barrier Reef. So I've reconstructed histories of past cyclone likely wave damage to all the 3,000 reefs of the Great Barrier Reef from 1969 to 2003. So now in my research, I focus on 2 aspects of cyclone impacts on reefs. Believe it or not, everyone knows about the fact that giant waves generated by cyclones can smash up reefs and damage them, and it might take them 10 to 100 years to recover. But you may not know that this wave action that cyclones generate, if it happens at the right time and in the right place, it can actually help coral reefs. So you've probably heard that corals do not like overheated water. If the water is more than 1 degree Celsius above the long-term average for a given place in the ocean, and if that lasts for at least 4 weeks in a row, that causes corals to become under stress, and they can be harmed, and if it lasts long enough, they can actually die. And this is coral bleaching. And when I engage with kids in my outreach program, I have a lot of fun ways to explain why that works. Basically, corals are a series of tiny little animals called coral polyps, millions of them on a given reef. They work together to secrete an external skeleton. So these tiny animals actually create these huge stony structures like the Great Barrier Reef that you can actually see from space. And they they actually get the bulk of their energy from a plant that lives inside them. So a coral polyp actually has a transparent body. It's totally see-through. So the beautiful colors that corals have that you may have seen if you've been diving or snorkeling actually come from these tiny little plants called zooxanthellae. So there's billions of these in a given coral polyp. They photosynthesize, so they take the sun's light and turn that into sugar for the coral to ingest in exchange for having a safe place to live. But if the water's too hot, that sends those chemical reactions of photosynthesis out of kilter, and then free radicals, which are damaging molecules, get produced as well. And so then the coral polyp can't tolerate the damage from those free radicals, and they spit out the zooxanthellae that feeds them. So once they spit out the zooxanthellae, they are transparent again. Well, they were always transparent, but there's nothing that's colorful inside them anymore, and you're seeing their white skeleton. So they, in essence, turn white, and that's why we call it bleaching. So cyclones can be useful because they stir up the water column, and if the water's deep enough, there's cold water trapped underneath that doesn't normally mix with the rest of the ocean. And that water gets sucked up to the top and drops the water temperature. And that produces what's called a cool wake around the cyclone's track. And I could show you satellite images of this where you can clearly see the cooler temperatures. So I'm very interested in these as well. And people that are trying to, I've gone for 5 minutes.
Gone past your 5, so keep going if you want to finish off. I'm not going to interrupt you mid-sentence.
Oh my God. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so basically what I'm doing is reconstructing these cool wakes and the cyclone damage across the entire world's coral reefs over the past and also for future climate projections. And the reason why it matters is that if we're going to target conservation of reefs, we don't want to spend $1 billion trying to save a reef that's likely to get smashed by cyclones every single year. And I'm involved in a project at work to feed that info in. And then my outreach program is about communicating climate change by teaching people about why coral reefs and penguins and all of us are at risk from these things. So that's it.
And if you haven't seen Mari do this, I'm sure there's a YouTube of you dressed up as a coral polyp somewhere. She's got
yes, I can send you links
on her and stuff. I reckon we can do one question per person. So does anyone have a question for Mari?
I bombarded you with a lot of info. Oh, great.
Amelia has a question.
Hi, Mari. I'm just wondering, I don't know, obviously in Australia, you know, the GBR gets all the press. Have there been many bleaching events at Ningaloo, and does that cool water event happen at Ningaloo as well?
Yeah, so that's a good question. In Western Australia, we don't always get the bleaching at these, it's a more complicated scenario. And yes, you often don't hear about it. It's like the reefs don't exist because some of them aren't even mapped. So there's an interesting relationship. There's the inshore Kimberley reefs, which are the far north. There's the offshore atolls like Scott Reef and the Rolly Shoals. And then there's the reefs down by Ningaloo as well. So depending on the dominant weather pattern, you usually, if you get bleaching at Ningaloo, you don't get it at Scott Reef and Rolly Shoals.
Oh, right.
So those three, Scott Reef has had the worst bleaching. Rolly Shoals has had the least over time. They recently had a minor bleaching, but that was it. At Ningaloo, I don't think they've had much. that's caused major damage. With the cool wakes, the oceanography of the location is really important. So you need to have deep enough water so that there's cold water underneath. If you have shallow water, the whole water column mixes all the time, so there's no cold water waiting underneath. You also, that cold water needs to be able to propagate and move. So if you've got, if you're in the inshore Great Barrier Reef, for example, and the cyclone's outside the reef, then it might be hard for that cool water to actually cool that off. And similarly, inside the Ningaloo Lagoon. But then there's other processes that scientists at Ames are studying about tidal currents and routine kind of processes that control flushing of these reefs. So on the Rolly Shoals, there's a lot of hydrodynamic flushing because there's a really high tidal range. And so that has a protective effect. But yeah, part of what I want to do with this big paper I'm working on is collaborate with oceanographers to characterize the different ocean basins where reefs are based on how conducive they are to protective cooling from cyclones, and then, you know, contrast that with how often cyclones happen there. So great questions.
Wow. I know, Mara, we could give you the rest of the hour. So, but we're going to say,
Yeah, shut me up.
yeah, no, you're a great science communicator. Who would like to go next? If you don't volunteer, I'm going to start picking.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Who's doing it? I've got to pick you anyway, Sandra.
That's good. Hello, everyone. Hola, Jamie, Lilia. Well, the rest I've seen. Oh, who's there? Dr. Kristen Mitchell and Ginger. Ginger, yeah. Well, my name is Sandra Velarde. I'm based in Rotorua, New Zealand. I'm from Peru originally, and now I'm a New Zealander since end of last year. Yay. So yeah, best country in the world, best country, right? No, it's beautiful. It's very green, which means it rains a lot as well. So what I do now, since the last year, since September, I work for the Climate Change Commission as a senior analyst in the land team. So what we do is compile or evidence. So it's kind of a massive literature review, but it's kind of a participatory literature review because we have to talk to stakeholders. So we contact people in industry, NGOs, scientists as well, to inform about what is their evidence on different things related to land and land emissions. In New Zealand, around 48% of emissions come from the agricultural sector, specifically ruminants, so cow, I think it's cow burps more than farts, but yeah, basically methane is one of the main sources. And of course, there is some controversies because methane is a short-lived gas, you know, like in 12 years it disappears. So many farmers argue that, well, then it shouldn't be considered as dangerous as CO2, therefore we shouldn't even count it. And, you know, like things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of controversy between agriculture, in the agriculture sector. The other part of, you know, the emissions is the electric vehicles, energy issues. I don't see those issues that much, but I see the bioenergy aspect. So planting wood, for example, for bioenergy, and what would be the consequences on land use. There is a lot of, I guess, bad publicity, but also lack of connection between the forest industry and people across New Zealand, really, because forest industry is mainly owned by private companies outside, by super funds, you know, like long-term investments. And yeah, like the owners and the decision makers are not in New Zealand. It's quite different from farmer, where, you know, it's like more farmers and they live here and they have more like rural jobs there. So there's a big tension there, and I'm kind of in the middle of collecting evidence from, you know, the science, what the science says, what the farmers are saying as well, and then communicating that in a way that makes sense for our commissioners, who are the ones who at the end take decisions on how many trees, how much, for how long, or on what other policies there will be to reduce emissions. So it's quite interesting. It's very vibrant work. I'm learning a lot in terms of science communication as well. Sometimes I request some information from scientists, and it's really annoying when they send me like 20 papers or 10 reports, and they expect me to, like go through them and just pick like the one number I was looking for. I'm like, oh my God, I don't have the time. Or they send me things about issues that I have no idea about, for example, horticulture. And then I have to kind of, speed up my learning so quickly. And it's just crazy. I mean, before I was only in forestry, and now I have to look across the land sector, and it's just massive. So you want to be a kind scientist, please just like succeed. And it's funny. Because of being on the other side, I'm like, oh God, like big mistakes. So I'm trying to keep in touch with my colleagues and trying to kind of teach them also like what are the needs from the policy side, in what formats, and like even if it's an early result, share it and contact me, those kind of tips, because it's good that we know that the paper will be published. So by the time that we finish writing our report, it has to go through, I don't know, 10 filters, then we can actually cite your publication. But in the meantime, we put a holder saying evidence coming, getting published this date or whatever. So yeah, it has been a learning experience, and I love, that was my husband, I love my job. And my hobby, my side thing is that I do illustrations, and kind of I try to compensate all the mental energy I put into the job with something a little bit more creative and more graphic and, more fun in a way. But yeah, I kind of left it a little bit behind, because now we have a deadline, which is the end of November, to produce a draft first report for the advice of the commission due in May, and we'll go out in consultation 1st of February. So really under the pump, and that's 5 minutes. So thank you very much.
It's so lovely to hear, Sandra, because I do recall you not being quite so keen about your past job. So it's always great to see people go from homebound and get something that actually they're enthusiastic and really feel like they're making a difference. Does anyone have a question? So we're doing one question per person. Does anyone have a question for Sandra? You're all going to now have to realise that someone has to think of a question for everyone. Yeah, Mari?
I have a question. Do you ever get the chance to use your amazing illustrations that you showed us in the other session we were in together in your actual, because I mean, they're great. They might, be helpful in it.
Yeah. So the first part, so September to March, so pre-COVID times, I used to go to Wellington every week. And so I'll have more face-to-face time with my colleagues. So back then I used to run meetings and just do my graphics, and, so they will be talking and I'll just be doing my graphics, and it was quite fun. But since COVID, and I haven't really taught myself to do it properly online. I need to work on that skills, because I think that'll be useful for our discussions. But every time I go to Wellington, which is once a month for a week, if we have a meeting, I'll just grab the board and try to do that. And it's really helpful for everyone. Everyone knows that I do that in consultations, previous consultations I've used that. But yeah, I have more fun with it. It's like a big whiteboard rather than, the computer, and I'm all like this. Yeah,
it's a great skill. Really useful and interesting and engaging for others, I think. Great. So who's going to be next? Jamie or Amelia, whichever one of you gets in first.
I could jump in. I actually came to this more to listen, because I was interested in what other people are doing. So I haven't prepared, but I will jump in. So I'm Kristen Mitchell. I'm an internal medicine doctor in Alaska in the United States. And in the earlier discussions today, I realized that the way that people train in medicine in Australia and the United States, and the names and labels we have for what happens, are very different. So I thought I would just maybe sort of do a US-based vocabulary lesson, so that maybe when we're talking about what people's professional designations are, that at least people from my side of the pond sort of, maybe there's some understanding of what those words mean. So in order to become a doctor in the United States, you have sort of 12 years of regular school, and then 4 years of undergraduate university education, and then 4 years of graduate medical education, which is medical school, where you are still in school, so there's no salary associated with that, and you are always under the supervision of another doctor who is teaching you. And then you have 3 years of residency. The first year is called an internship, and then the second 2 years are sort of the second part of the residency. It used to be that you were a resident in the hospital, and that's why it's called residency, but that's no longer the way that things work. You can only spend one night in every 3 at the hospital. So at the end of that time, then you can sit for board certification exams and be certified in internal medicine. So I did that, and on a lark came up to Alaska for a couple of years, thought that I would sort of learn some things, repay some loans, and then go back and rejoin civilization. And that's been 22 years ago. So I have stayed in Alaska, and I see patients here, all adult patients. So I'm an internist, which means I do internal medicine, which means it's adult medicine, not surgery. And when we talk about consultants in the United States, that's not sort of a hierarchy of what somebody's training is, but that has to do with, are you asking someone to help you solve a clinical question that your experience doesn't tell you the answer to? So you might consult with a surgeon, or you might consult with a cardiologist, and they would all be consultants to you as the person who's primarily taking care of the patient. So as an internal medicine doctor, I do primary care for lots of my patients. I have a little bit of a subspecialty of transgender medicine in a cohort of patients that I have as a favor to a colleague, I said, sure, I'm willing to do this journey with somebody and learn along with my patient some years ago, and word travels fast. So I definitely have a cohort of transgender patients here in rural Alaska. And along the way, I also got board certified in sleep medicine. So I do sleep evaluations and consults for people with sleep disorders. So that's what I do. And then I teach. So I have third-year medical students that come from the University of Washington in Seattle, and they rotate with us usually for 6 weeks. And we haven't had somebody here yet since the COVID shutdown. So it'll be a new kind of adventure to learn how to supervise somebody doing remote telemedicine. So in some ways I'm looking forward to that challenge. And in some ways I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, it's hard enough to kind of get a sense of somebody's relationship with somebody else when you're actually physically in the room with everybody, and to try and do that as a fly on the wall on Zoom is it'll be interesting. But one good thing about medicine is you always learn something new. So I'm continuing to learn new things. And then I guess I would say since HB, the things that I have done outside of medicine are, I have kind of put my hat in the ring for a number of things, and a lot of times it hasn't worked. So I ran for president of my state medical association professional group and didn't get that. And I put my hat in the ring for the sustainability commission at our borough level and didn't get that. And I was chair of the medicine committee and was demoted from that just before HB. So I had a little bit of a thing going about like, am I really in this for leadership? But in some ways, having those no's and being turned down has made it a little easier to say, all right, well, I'll try it. If it doesn't come through, that's fine. I'll do something else, or I'll have more free time. So I have stepped up to do some national roles for my professional organization. So I'm on a national immunization committee, which I was appointed to just before the pandemic and has become a much bigger deal. And then a medical policy committee that is also a big deal as we're thinking about the social justice reforms and the big payment reforms and what's going on with telemedicine. So that's been rewarding to have a voice on the national level. And I'm now part of my state medical board, and I've kind of taken it upon myself to be an advisor to some of the politicians who are running for office. And we won't know whether they've been elected since Alaska doesn't start counting votes until Tuesday from our absentee population, but maybe knock wood, Alaska will be part of changing the representation in the Senate. I'm not holding my breath, but that would be a good thing. And I think my biggest science communication recently comes in interaction with patients. Just there's so much misinformation about COVID and so many questions. And I think it gives me a chance to practice and refine and be unsuccessful and try again over and over and over again. So thanks to Homeward Bound for giving me the courage and the motivation to try out some of those things and fall on my face some of the time and get back up again.
I've just realized I muted myself. It's fantastic because I was typing. I hope it was helpful. I was trying to align for Australians and New Zealanders, who many of the people are, what the various roles are that we use so that you could understand what Kristen was saying. Who's a question for Kristen?
I do. Hi, it's Ginger here. Hi, Kristen. It's been a while.
Hugs. Good to see you again.
Yeah. I think what I would like to know is, how did you come back up with all the rejection that you faced? Yeah.
So I think really Homeward Bound helped me a lot with that. That in my pre-Homeward Bound persona, I was very invested in being successful and really only trying things when I was 95% sure I would be successful, and not really risking something that I might stumble or fail or not be successful at. And so I think I got to a point thinking about Homeward Bound that it wasn't personal. I wouldn't take it personally. There's a lot of people who could do things. I'm not the only person who can save the universe. And so if I'm sort of essentially volunteering to say I'm willing to help and someone says no thanks, that I could find another realm that I'd be able to maybe be useful. And so and in some ways the first rejection is the hardest for me. And then when there's a bunch of them, it's kind of like, all right, another one bites the dust. Then there are so many things that could be done, and I don't have that much time. So some of it is trying to be a little strategic about what do I want to focus on, but also putting my hat in the ring enough that I've got something going on that I'm doing that's outside of medicine.
Yeah. And where do they want you? Like, you don't want to invest all that time if that, in some ways it's a two-way process, isn't it? Do I want to work with you, and do you want to work with me? Anyway, I think it does take a lot of self-awareness, Kristen, to cope with rejection. So I think that's a journey we're all on, and at different points, and can keep working on. Absolutely. And I have gone for lots of things I haven't got to. So I think it's pretty common in medicine, but I think it's very common around the world in many jobs. I'm going to say Amelia next, because I know Amelia and Jamie both were happy to go soon. So we'll go Amelia, Jamie.
Thank you, Sophia. So I guess what I wanted to share here was a bit of a reflection that I had last week at work. So it's a bit kind of maybe a bit out of left field, but I work in Australia's National Science Agency, the CSIRO, and I have a policy background, and I joined CSIRO about 3 years ago, and I work in their Climate Science Centre, so with all of their climate scientists. And last year, a lady called Penny Wetton passed away from our branch, and just this week we had we called it her name was Penny Wetton, and we called it the Penny Wetton Symposium, and it was an opportunity for staff to share their thoughts and reflections on the contribution that Penny made to our branch through her long and very productive career. And the reason why I wanted to share this with you guys was, first of all, like, I never met Penny myself, so I don't know her. But what really struck me about the symposium and the talks that people gave was the kind of leader that they described, and it really resonated with me because it just aligned so much with the the leadership lessons that we're learning through Homeward Bound. So apparently Penny was, a very well-respected climate scientist globally. She was very passionate about mentoring her younger staff and her students. She was very much about, lifting people up around her and supporting other people. one person told a story of how he had applied for a job in her branch. He didn't, you know, he wasn't a climate scientist, didn't really know much about it, but just thought, oh yes, I'd like to work on that. And somehow Penny gave him the job, and she actually kind of coached him, and he ended up doing a PhD in climate science, you know, through her kind of mentorship and support. And she also, this kind of links to something that Sandra said, she also had a very fulfilling life outside of her work. So she loved history, and she was also quite a talented artist. And so she, you know, they showed in the presentation some pictures that she had painted, and, you know, they were amazing. And she could have, you know, she did have her own exhibitions. But something that I loved about that was that, so she was an author of the IPCC's 5th assessment report, and apparently, you know, because of her sort of through her artistic skills, she kind of designed this color scheme for, you know, the global map around climate change changes. And that sort of scheme, I don't know what the right word is, but that kind of pattern, that key was actually implemented by the IPCC and has since been used in subsequent reports. So I thought that was a really lovely thing as well, that resonated with me about, you know, that kind of connection, that deep connection that we can have between science and art. So I don't know where I'm going with this. I guess it just really, even though I'd never met Penny, it just really struck me how, you know, what a legacy that she left. And for me, it just really reinforced the importance of all of the things that, you know, we're learning about in Homeward Bound, and the way that we're all, you know, trying to support each other, and the importance of that, you know, cross-discipline communication as well.
Absolutely. And Penny is quite famous in Australia, and famous also for being married to Janet Rice, who's a Greens senator. I think she's a senator. Her actual job title, I probably should know that much better than I do. But, you know, the celebration of gay marriage was also a very much part of their story as well. So I think very progressive couple, and have had a big impact. And isn't it fantastic? You work somewhere where I have heard very positive and, you know, also some criticism of the CSIRO workplace, not having ever worked in it myself. But isn't it great that you work somewhere where they can celebrate someone's life, and that, you know, I would love to think that when I die, people will get together and talk about the things I contributed. And in fact, whether they talk about it or not, isn't it just enough to know that you have contributed and that you've done some things that make a difference? So, does anyone have a specific question for Amelia? Other than thank you very much for sharing that.
Sorry, that was a bit random, but yeah.
No, random. Good. All sharing.
Yeah, I was imagining, I think the word you wanted to use was palette, the color palette. I think that's the word. There is, oh, I have to share this, it's so funny. Twitter has like a color palette for birds of New Zealand. So you have like a TUI color palette, and then you have, you know, the whites, the black, and then different parts of blue. So by bird, there are some, I'll share that. I'll look for that. Yeah,
put it in the chat for us.
Yeah, I'll look for it.
Can I ask Amelia a question? So Amelia, being part of that reflective exercise, did that help you then reflect on your leadership and how you want to be remembered, or the things that you want to do?
It really did, and it made me realize, perhaps even more than I had before, how big an impact little things can have. You know, little kind of turning points in people's lives. You can kind of help them, you know, turn this way instead of that way, and it might just be a little turn at the time, but that can go on to have a really big impact on that person's life. And just, yeah, there's just a huge list of people, men and women, who just, you know, they couldn't say enough nice things about Penny. And so it just made me reflect on how, you know, how big a difference all of us can have, if, you know, if we choose to, and if we have that, you know, kind of compassion and thoughtfulness. And one of the other things that reinforced for me too was that it is really important to have another life as well, like that work shouldn't be your life, and just how rich Penny's life was because of her, you know, photography and her painting and her love of history and all that kind of thing. And it's kind of okay, and it's good to do that. It makes you a better leader by having that, you know, fuller life.
Yeah.
One comment on in terms of like celebration of other things beyond your work. I've been to different farewells recently, including like my own farewell from my old job. And then, you know, like people have all these beautiful things to say about me and, you know, about people who are leaving. And I'm like, what the heck? I needed you to tell me that when I was working here, not when I leave or not when I die. So I'm trying to also in my team, you know, to make it like a more like, what are we celebrating this week or every couple of weeks? Like there is always something. And then we try to always kind of encourage, even if it's, you know, well, especially if it's an outside of work kind of thing. So yeah, celebrating more constantly, I think it's needed.
Absolutely. Now I want to get going because there's 3 more people. Jamie, you're up if you're happy to do so.
All right, great. Thank you, Sophie. Hi, my name is Jamie Womble. I am also based in Alaska, in Juneau, Alaska, and I was a part of HB2 with Sandra and Sophie. It's great to see everyone here. I am a marine scientist and I work for the National Park Service in Alaska, leading programs focused on large marine predators, so seabirds, seals, sea lions, sea otters, things of that nature. Since HB2, I have transitioned into a slightly different position that is more interdisciplinary in nature. And it's been an exciting time of growth for me because we are focused on developing a new long-term project that will be focused in one of the heaviest glaciated regions outside of Greenland and Antarctica, and trying to understand how physical drivers such as climate and glaciers, physical oceanography then influence mid, lower, and then upper trophic species like whales and seals and seabirds and things like that. So I've been heavily focused on that for the last several months, just trying to get our team up and running and develop study plans for moving that forward. And I guess I've also at the same time had the chance to do a lot of reflection as it relates to some of the skills that I had the opportunity to learn with Homeward Bound, and now trying to apply them to this new project with that's quite multidisciplinary in nature, with physical oceanographers, glaciologists, biologists, and we all talk different languages, but trying to establish a shared pool of meaning so that we can move this project forward. So I feel like a lot of the things that we talked about and learned in Homeward Bound have helped with that. So that's exciting. And I guess on a more perhaps personal note, I also feel like I've had the opportunity to share thoughts and ideas and be a sounding board for other colleagues that haven't had the chance to participate in Homeward Bound, but able to share and support them through different challenges that they may be having in their workplace or personal life. So I feel like I can continue to come back to things from HB2 and that were really positive for me both personally and professionally. And I think I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
It's really great to hear all these people doing new roles and integrating and working across different levels. It's like music, Jamie. It's so great to hear. Does anyone have a specific question for Jamie? No?
I have one about, so what is the most challenging, I guess, part of that multidisciplinary project that you are in? Is it the language, like, you know, that you use, or is it something else?
That's a great question. And I don't know if I'm quite sure what the most challenging part is. I think the most challenging is that we can't all sit in a room together, you know, right now because of COVID. So we're doing a lot of Zoom talks or, you know, Zoom meetings for planning, and it's working, but you know, I think we all speak slightly different languages, and the goal is to have an integrated long-term research and monitoring program. So even though we could each launch out and ask our own very specific research question, in the end, the goal is to make sure that those response variables from each of those respective disciplines, that we're able to integrate those and ask questions about how the system is changing spatially and temporally over time with climate changing and different things like that. So I guess that right now is just trying to think about that more on the front end. And I think that's a little bit challenging because I think it's natural for each of us as individuals just to launch out and do what we do best and what we know most about. So trying to bring it back to some more synthetic and integrated understanding of how these glacial marine systems might be working and how, you know, ongoing and predicted changes in climate may influence these systems.
Excellent. It is really, we could absolutely talk about that for the next 20 minutes. I'm going to give Ginger a go though. Ginger, you're going to be able to show it. Yeah. So how well is your internet going to work if you talk and video at the same time?
If it drops out, just, yeah, it's all right. We can talk about it later. Yeah. So I want to share what I learned this year. It's the most challenging. It's one of the most challenging year I've ever had. And also, I guess, wanted to celebrate some of the exciting impact that I have made, I think, I hope. So at the beginning of the year, to give you context, I'm a consultant working at KPMG, but given that my background and experience, I have worked with Australian government as a public servant and worked in IT projects as a business analyst, so building systems and analyzing the requirements of systems of the users. And recently this year, my focus has been emergency response for everything. In the first few months of this year, I was seconded to Bushfire Recovery Victoria as an agency to set up to coordinate efforts within Victoria to respond to bushfires. And then in April, I was seconded to the Department of Human Health and Services looking at COVID response in Victoria, in Australia. Because I think throughout the year, I have learned so much about emergency response and how chaotic it could be, and that learning more about everything that I never really thought I would about HR, how to set up business processes. Like to give you a bit of an example, say if you go into a company or working in an organization, you have a laptop set up, you know who to go to for your reporting manager when you have issues, HR issues, whatever. None of that existed. So my role in the team is to set that up for people. And given that we have no idea about the experience, there was no, I think people were running around like headless chooks. I don't know if you heard of that expressions. Literally, like whatever existed didn't exist. And I felt it was just really crazy. I don't understand why people couldn't use the system and information that we had already. Anyway, that was a large part of my work. But on the other side, this year I have made my own goals, looking at the strategy map to, after many iterations of my own strategy map after Homeward Bound, I want to live more sustainably. So this year I've started regrowing random plants and vegetables in the garden. So now I have some spring onions growing and one root of basil and some other onions buried in the ground, and also set up a worm farm that my friend helped me pick up from the hard rubbish, so I didn't have to buy it. I'm very lucky to have friends who supported that kind of living style, and I'm very lucky to be able to live near I guess vegetable markets and bulk stores where you can buy things in bulk and bring my own like jars and containers and yeah, that type of stuff. So I think that's a celebration for me, that I learn, actually practicing what I really want to achieve and what I said I'd do. And yeah, I think, and what I'm actually at the same time not very satisfied about my own job. I want to work more in the more environmental programs or organization that focus on the area, such as Sustainability Victoria and other councils or agencies like that. So I have also applied for, probably submitted about 30 job applications this year, and some interviews and some straight out rejection. So that's why I asked Kristen about, how did you face rejection? Because it's really hard after trying so hard and working so hard, and then, the answer was no at the end. It's not so much about, my ability to do these things, but sometimes about how I express and how the environment, how other applicants have, just different experience on that. And I find it still difficult to take that in. So yes, a bit of random what I learned this year. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone have a question for Ginger?
I have a question for Ginger. Have you reached out to your fellow Homeward Bounders for help to review your CVs and practice some interview questions?
Yes and no. Yeah.
I recommend.
I guess, yeah, it would be really good. I have posted some questions on, how to go about reaching out, like networking. Unfortunately, it's not as easy at the moment, but given that the easing of restriction, I'm hopeful that I'll be able to get more opportunities this way. Thanks.
It really strikes. Oh, sorry, go.
Yeah, I was curious. You mentioned that you were involved most recently, I think, with emergency response related to COVID. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, being in the US and things are not going so well with respect to COVID, I'm curious what you think have been the most successful approaches, that have been implemented in Australia or in, the sphere that you're working in.
Yeah, I think it's a more coordinated response, and talking about what are we trying to do, what's the focus, what's the purpose, that makes it like unite people is more important. But I guess on the other hand, I understand like in United States, people are very individualistic and wanted to have their own freedom. I think that is quite different to Australia. And say, for example, my hometown in Taiwan, that people are working more of as a whole, as a group, rather than an individual person's action. Yeah, but like we have seen people who are interested in their own freedom, so that disregarding public health. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Great, thank you.
so tricky. Now we've got 7 minutes. Christina, I really think you should go in 3 or 4, and I don't really mind if we get to me, but if you want to hear from me, I'll do the last 3.
Okay, I'll try to keep it really short, basically. So in my academic career, I'm an organizational psychologist. So I did a lot of research on organizational change, but also human factors related areas like human interface design, etc. And then in 2014, I joined, I left academia. I was still working for Accenture. Like 2004, I went to the consulting area, and then 2014, and continued lecturing and researching, and then joined government agencies transport in 2014. So for me, that was a real shock to the system, coming from research into a government organization, especially.
She's paused to everyone. Can you all hear me?
Of a community energy organization, the largest in Australia. We cleared up with the Green Globe Awards in 2018, and that's how I met Annika. And yeah, so I have these 2 passions, sustainability and creating systems that are really working well for people. So I would love to somehow bring it together at one point. At the moment, I don't make money from community energy. That's a passion project and a hobby. So I have to keep my day job, but eventually, getting older and moving forward, I might reduce the work in government. But it's so fascinating because I work on trains a lot, and all the technologies we're using, VR, AR, LiDARs, so moving into really interesting spaces. And now looking at it from the innovation head, but also from the human factors head, is really just fascinating. So yeah, it's me, basically.
It's really interesting. I'm sorry I got kicked out. Ginger's asking a question, I think. No, she's talking about something you mentioned.
Yep.
Does anyone else have a question for Christina? I have a question. Am I calling you the right thing? Is it Tina? Is it Christina? Is it Christiana? Because I'm Sophie, and I know Sophia gets everyone very confused. It's my university website.
Yeah, I'm Christina normally in my full name, but a lot of my friends call me Nina. And so you'll find several people in Homeward Bound and my friends that will call me Nina. But we had 2 Ninas, and so that had made it more challenging. And several Christinas. You probably all had similar problems with names.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you have to check several times that you're pronouncing it right, because it's so easy to get it wrong. Mari's is the hardest.
It's
Margie.
Yeah, and I would love to hear what you're doing, Sophie.
Okay, the 2-minute version. Some people know various things. I'm a psychiatrist. I work in youth mental health at the moment. I have a background in CL psychiatry, which is about the interfaces and overlap between medicine and mental health. And I've been trying to shift roles because the organisation I work for, while really interesting in many ways, and the work is really important, we're working with young people who are falling between the gaps in the Western Melbourne, which is the less rich part. I work with leaders who will not be leaving and will not share some of the things that they do. So there's no capacity for me to grow where I am. And I'm on a maybe 4 years now journey to try and get another job. And so like Kristen, I have applied for lots of jobs. and I get told, and the problem is that there are not many jobs at my level now. And I get asked to help out. So I've done lots of 6-month or a year secondments of building up someone else's service and then giving it back to them. I'm like the fix-it person, the one that, you can give something to who'll be able to do the difficult job. But we don't give her the job long-term because, well, she might change things. And so I've had lots of, you were the best interviewer, you spoke the best, but we really just like this nice white man who's a bit older than you, and we think, well, this be a better fit. So I've been railing against that, and in doing so I started doing additional training in medical administration, because I think one of the ways to help the bigger picture and the systems, which is what I'm interested in, is to get jobs where you have oversight of a larger bit of the system. And so I'm currently doing a medical admin job, again another 6-month job fill in for 1 day a week, and then the rest of the week I'm doing my normal job, in this endeavour to shift tracks and to shift roles into something else. And damn, it's hard to convince people you can do something that they're doing now that you can do because you've already done it in mental health for years, but they don't really, there's a bit of stigma about mental health and they don't really think psychiatrists can do things. But yeah, there's a lot of doctors think that psychiatrists are crazy. So yeah, gender stuff and anti-psychiatry stigma are my current battlefield.
No.
And I think
Do you ever get the oh, you're overqualified, you will get bored in this job?
Yes, yeah. And the problem is I keep doing degrees to kind of, or fellowships to say, look, I can do this and I can do this, I can do this, and they're like, oh, well, you've got too many degrees. And you're like, I don't believe you can know too much, but yes, it is. Yeah. I think it's just useful for everyone to know that some things go well and some things don't go so well, and I think your midlife is really that time when you're going, what are my values and what do I want to contribute, and actually will people let me, or what impact can I have in smaller ways, or in integrating or sharing or working. And for me, Homeward Bound is one of the things that I feel like I can help, and that's not easy but relatively straightforward, whereas my professional life is a little bit more frustrating. Anyway, it'll get better. Eventually someone has to give me a go. We're at 2, and I see some more people have logged on, so they're probably logging on for the next thing. Did those of you who, because the poll came up in front of me, did those of you do the poll, or Christina, do we need to do the poll?
I quickly did the poll, or it says relaunch. I'm launching it. So basically, let us know if anyone has an objection to the poll being shared. So we have 3 more.
Mine isn't giving me an option. It's just saying end poll. I think because I'm a co-host with you.
Oh, okay, yeah. So which means you can end the poll.
But yeah, I can't vote.
Anyone? Okay. Oh, great. So great. Everybody has voted. Oh, perfect. We got 100%. So which means, can you save the recording and then welcome to